This is Jack's Nightmares broadcasting from a safe place. If you can hear me, you're one of the last. What you're about to hear is the story of a survivor, or at least someone who tried to be. Subscribe and comment if you're still out there. And now, let's begin. I woke up in darkness, sprawled across a cold concrete floor. A dull ache ran through my shoulder and my tongue felt like sandpaper. The air was thick with the scent of stale booze and something sharp and metallic. Rolling onto my back, I took in my surroundings, a cramped storage room, dimly lit by a flickering emergency light. As I struggled to sit up, my hand fumbled against the rough wall, searching for a light switch. Then my gaze landed on the only closed door, and a vague memory surfaced. I'd come here after being denied unemployment benefits. Again. Even a few weeks after losing my security job, I still carried the habits of scanning a new space. Empty boxes, broken glass, and a smudged trail across the floor suggested something had been dragged from one side of the room to the other. I felt a sting in my elbow as I sat up. My clothes were ruined by spilled liquor. A splintered broomstick lay snapped in half behind me. It felt like I'd been in a fight with the entire bar, and the bar had won. I tried to recall the night before. I was in a downtown hole in the wall, drowning my disappointment in cheap shots, letting the hours blur. Voices had blurred too, followed by laughter, arguments, and eventually darkness. There had been no plan, just the usual pattern. Frustration at my situation, a few too many drinks, everything fading to black. But now, this felt different from the usual hangover routine. A tense energy in the air, the flicker of lights, and the hush of an abandoned building. Leaning against the nearest crate, I realized I was locked in the stockroom. The doorknob refused to budge. Either it was jammed, or barricaded from the outside. I tried to listen for anything, pressing an ear to the door's surface. All I heard were muffled thuds and an occasional scraping sound, like furniture dragged across concrete. None of it made sense. A dryness in my throat cut through all other thoughts. I was desperate for water. With shaky steps, I rummaged for any unopened bottle. Most crates were empty or contained half-used mixers that probably expired months ago. Eventually, I found a single small bottle of water in a corner near a stack of chipped glasses. It was warm and dusty, but it was liquid. My hands trembled around the bottle as I drank. The relief was immediate, though overshadowed by the bizarre sense that something serious had happened. Moments later, a crash echoed from the other side of the door. It rattled in its frame, as if struck by a heavy object. Part of me wanted to yank it open and see what was going on, but caution, and the distant memory of my training, slowed me. Being a security guard once taught me to weigh the risk before rushing in. Although I'd lost that job weeks ago, some instincts never fade. I scanned the room again for potential exits. No windows, only a small vent near the ceiling that probably opened to nowhere. The stockroom was a dead end. A new sound reached my ears, a low moan, not quite human, followed by the shuffle of feet on broken glass. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I edged closer to the door's built-in window, the kind with wire mesh embedded in the glass. The stockroom's fluorescent bulb flickered, and I almost expected something to leap at me through the window. Instead, I saw only the empty bar floor beyond. Overturned chairs, smashed bottles. A single overhead lamp swayed, illuminating a booth splashed with dark stains. Something about those stains looked disturbingly fresh. Suddenly, a silhouette drifted into view. It moved erratically, head bent forward. At first, I thought it was just another unconscious patron, but then I noticed the figure crouch over what looked like a motionless shape on the ground. The newcomer's posture was unusual, too rigid, as if guided by something primal. The shape on the floor didn't move at all. A wave of nausea rolled through me, and I fought to keep my sense of balance. My thoughts scattered between wild theories, a robbery gone wrong, a riot, or maybe something more disturbing. I needed answers. I pulled away from the window to scan the stockroom for anything that could function as a weapon. The broken broomstick might serve as some kind of blunt instrument, though it wouldn't hold up long against force. I grabbed it anyway, not wanting to face the unknown empty-handed. A scraping noise interrupted my thoughts. It sounded like nails or claws scratching the door from the other side, but it quickly faded away. Silence fell, and that silence felt worse than the noise. No voices, no music, just an oppressive quiet. I replayed the muffled moan I'd heard moments ago, the rigid movements of the person outside, and the possibility that everything around me was part of a terrifying scenario. When I touched the door again, I noticed it was slightly looser in the frame. Maybe something was removed from the other side, or maybe whatever had been pressed against it had slunk away. Pressing my face to the wired window, I caught a better glimpse of the bar. The silhouette was gone, but the motionless shape remained on the floor. Everything stayed oddly still, except for the flickering overhead lamp. The sense of dread continued to spike. I decided to try the door once more, gently this time. It opened a crack, just enough for me to see further into the bar. No sign of the lurking figure. My breath felt shallow as I nudged the door open a bit wider, stepping into the main area. Broken glass crunched under my sneakers. The place was trashed beyond a typical bar fight. Tables smashed, the jukebox knocked over, stools embedded in the walls as if thrown with tremendous force. A wave of dizziness forced me to pause. The leftover effects of cheap alcohol mixed with pure anxiety created a dangerous cocktail in my system. My training used to guide me in high-stress moments, but that job was gone. I hadn't worn a uniform in weeks. That uniform was a symbol of some authority, something that reminded me I could handle emergencies. Now I just felt like an out-of-work nobody with a broomstick in hand. I crept past the bar counter, glancing over broken bottles. There was a phone near the register, but the line was dead. A lone television, perched high in a corner, showed static. Every so often, a distorted emergency broadcast message flickered, but it was impossible to make out. I clicked the battered remote lying on the counter. For a moment, the image cleared. A figure in front of a news desk, wide-eyed, mouthing the words, "National emergency." Then static returned, filled with the occasional burst of warning sirens. My gaze drifted to the shape on the floor. Up close, it appeared to be a person lying face down, not moving. I crouched at a safe distance, trying to see if there was any sign of life. No movement, no breathing sounds. The clothes were torn, but I couldn't make out more details in the dim light. Something about the color of the floor around them made me step back immediately. A queasy feeling roiled in my stomach, and I focused on scanning the rest of the area instead. A noise from behind the bar made me spin around. Bottles clinked, like someone or something was searching for scraps. Tightening my grip on the broomstick, I positioned myself behind a fallen stool. The rummaging continued, accompanied by a guttural exhale. I tried to focus, wishing I had the calm I once relied on in tense security situations. This time, all I had was desperation. Finally, a shape rose into view. It was the same figure I'd noticed through the door's window. Tall, disheveled, with shaky steps. The person wore a tattered jacket, and from my vantage, there seemed to be a wound on their cheek. Their eyes looked glazed over in the flickering light. They showed no reaction to the glass shards littered around their bare feet. Their presence felt ominous, but I couldn't pin down why. A primal fear sank in as I realized something was very wrong with the way they moved. Any lingering haze from my hangover disappeared in that moment. I kept as still as possible, trying to decide whether to reveal myself or stay hidden. The figure lurched forward, stumbling closer to the bar's exit. A distant commotion outside made it stop, as if straining to hear. Then it let out a low moan and shuffled through the busted door frame. That moan reminded me of the earlier sound near the stockroom door. Watching the figure leave, I took a deep, shaking breath. The sense of relief lasted only a second before I heard more sounds outside. Car alarms, distant shouting, and what might have been crashing metal. I stared at the battered door leading to the street. It swung on one hinge, as though someone had forced their way in. Light from outside illuminated the interior for a brief moment. That glimpse was enough to reveal smears along the walls I hadn't noticed before. I averted my eyes and tried to keep moving. Every nerve felt alive, urging me to stay alert, to keep looking for a safer place or a clue about what was going on. There was a hallway at the back of the bar, usually leading to restrooms or an office. Both restroom doors were wide open, lights inside flickering. A mirror in one restroom hung askew, revealing spiderweb cracks. Something was scrawled across the tiled wall, but the half-smashed door made it hard to read. The office door stood closed and looked intact, so I made my way in that direction. Halfway down the hall, a sudden crash erupted behind me. In the reflection from the broken mirror, I saw something dart through the remains of the bar's front door. It looked similar to the figure that had just left, but this one moved more rapidly. I wasn't about to wait for a confrontation. Moving as quickly as I could, I dashed toward the office door. The floor felt slick, and I nearly lost my footing, but I managed to reach the handle and twist it open. Inside was a small office with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a wall-mounted TV showing the same static-filled broadcast. Paperwork and receipts littered the floor. The faint glow from the TV illuminated a shaky image of a news anchor repeating words like "stay indoors," "global crisis," and "unidentified infection." My eyes flicked from the TV to the door. The lock on the office door seemed flimsy, but it was better than nothing. I clicked it shut, pressing my ear to the wood, hoping I wasn't trapping myself. The noise outside the office grew, a shuffling, then a dull thud against the hallway wall. It sounded like something collided with the restroom door or another piece of debris. My breath grew ragged, and I tried to remember everything I'd ever learned about crisis management. Remain calm, assess the situation, find a safe route. None of that prepared me for the unnatural sounds drifting through the hallway. I needed information. Scanning the office, I found a half-charged phone on the desk, a cheap flip phone. No signal bars appeared on the screen, only an emergency alert that refused to connect me to any service. At least I had a faint clue from the broadcast. Something big was happening, some kind of pandemic or outbreak that turned people into husks of themselves. The moaning figure outside, the destroyed bar, the partial newscast repeating "unidentified infection." It all started to piece together in a horrifying way. Another jolt hit the office door, making me step back. The handle rattled as if tested. I gripped the broomstick tighter. With no other exit, I prepared to face whatever was on the other side. Seconds stretched out, then I heard scratching in the hallway, followed by fading footsteps. Whoever, or whatever, was there had moved on for the moment. The tension made it impossible to think straight. Deciding I couldn't stay pinned in the office forever, I looked around for anything useful. A desk drawer revealed an old flashlight, flickering but functional, plus a ring of keys. One of them might open a back exit, or maybe a staff entrance. The battered TV on the wall looped a partial emergency message. All citizens, remain indoors, shelter, avoid contact with individuals, and then static again. My stomach churned. This was no ordinary incident. Creaking the door open a sliver, I peered into the hallway. It was empty, although an overturned bucket lay near the restroom. At the far end of the bar, more glass shattered as something or someone entered. Low groans and irregular footsteps signaled more unwelcome visitors. The thought of staying there until they found me felt worse than anything else. Summoning some courage, I slipped out of the office. I stayed close to the wall, inching back toward the main bar. Movement flickered in my peripheral vision. Two figures roamed among the broken chairs. They looked human, but their movements were jerky. One stumbled into a table leg and fell, letting out a rasping sound. The other turned and bent down, apparently checking on them, but there was no conversation, no normal words, just that same eerie moaning. I inched away, heading behind the counter. Broken liquor bottles littered the floor, and the smell of spilled beer clashed with an odor I couldn't quite place, something rancid. I glanced at the row of shelves, hoping for anything that might help. Most items were worthless. Dusty glasses, a few bar towels. One drawer contained a small pocket knife, likely used for slicing fruit. It was dull, but better than nothing. I slid it into my hoodie pocket. Deciding to circle around toward the back exit, I crouched beneath the counter. The two figures were still wandering near the front door, occasionally bumping into tables. Something about them felt off, as if their senses were diminished. Every movement they made was awkward. It offered a slim advantage. Maybe I could slip by them without drawing attention. But there was also the memory of that first silhouette hovering over a motionless shape. If they caught sight of me, I had no idea how they might react. Crawling through the debris, I kept my head low. A tension settled in my body that felt like a coiled spring. My hands stung from brushing against shards of glass, but I kept going. Near the back, a faint light filtered through a broken window above the sink. Outside, the sounds of chaos flared, sirens blaring, car tires screeching, and something that might have been yelling or shrieking in the distance. It painted a picture of a city in panic. Just as I neared the back door, a commotion erupted from the bar's front. More shapes lurched inside, toppling chairs. One of them let out a guttural noise, and I spotted its face briefly in the reflection of a hanging mirror behind the bar. Pale skin, eyes that appeared cloudy. The creature's mouth hung open, and it advanced on the stumbling pair I'd seen moments ago. The encounter turned bizarre, like they were all drawn by the presence of living beings. None seemed coordinated, but the tension in the air soared. I tugged on the back door, locked. Cursing under my breath, I remembered the ring of keys from the office. With a trembling hand, I tested them one by one in the lock. The second key stuck, but the third finally turned with a heavy click. Relief was short-lived. As I pushed the door open, a figure lunged around the corner. Ragged clothing, vacant expression, arms outstretched in a jerky motion. It tried to grab me, but I managed to dodge behind the swinging door. Broomstick in hand, I slammed the door into the figure's shoulder. It staggered back, letting out a hiss that sounded inhuman. I slipped outside, stumbling into a narrow alley behind the bar. The figure pushed the door open from the inside, briefly wedging itself in the doorway, letting me gain a few steps. Without looking back, I sprinted toward the main street, which was only a few yards ahead. The scene on the street was worse than anything I expected. A few cars idled with doors open, lights still on. A hydrant sprayed water into the road. The sidewalk was scattered with dropped belongings, purses, backpacks, even shoes. A constant chorus of distant alarms provided background noise. Occasional silhouettes moved across the intersection. Some hurried, as if escaping. Others walked in that same eerie shuffle I had witnessed inside. It was impossible to tell friend from foe at a glance. At the corner, an abandoned police cruiser flashed its lights. I approached, hoping for some sense of protection, but nobody was inside. The driver's door hung open. The radio crackled with urgent transmissions. Districts, overrun. Send additional units to... And then static. The trunk was partially ajar. Against my better judgment, I pulled it open, but found nothing except a damaged toolbox and a spare tire. Not even a radio or first aid kit to salvage. I dashed between two parked cars, trying to stay out of sight from the wandering shapes. One of them, across the street, seemed to notice me. It paused, turning its head in my direction. An unsettling awareness passed through me as I realized how quickly they could fix on movement. Without hesitation, I ducked into another alley, tripping over a toppled trash can. The metal clatter resonated, drawing attention I didn't want. The figure shuffled faster, letting out a throaty groan that echoed in the empty street. Another joined in, staggering out from behind a crashed sedan. At this point, all I could do was keep moving. My legs burned, and my mind raced with questions. How had things descended into chaos so fast? Why did these individuals act so erratically? Was it some new strain of disease? The words unidentified infection from the TV replayed in my thoughts again and again. I turned a corner and nearly collided with someone sprinting in the opposite direction. She wore a torn jacket, eyes wild, hair matted. She didn't slow down, barely acknowledged my existence, just kept running. Behind her came more moaning, more of those staggering individuals. They spread through the streets like a tide, and it struck me that maybe I needed to find a secure building rather than run aimlessly. A single glimmer of hope appeared when I noticed an apartment complex on the next block. Its front doors seemed intact, and a few lights shone in the upper windows. I rushed over, expecting to find a locked entrance. Miraculously, the door was open. I slipped inside, the foyer illuminated by flickering overhead bulbs. Broken mailboxes lined the wall, as if someone had pried them open recently. An elevator at the end of the hall displayed an error code on its panel. There was also a staircase leading up. Halfway to the stairs, I realized that same oppressive hush from the bar had taken hold here. No sign of residents, no normal hustle and bustle for an apartment building. My footsteps echoed as I ascended, each step an exercise in caution. On the second floor, the hallway lights flickered, revealing battered doors. One lay in splinters, opening to a living room that was in total disarray. Stepping inside, I saw a TV toppled from its stand, a couch flipped, and personal items strewn everywhere. Movement behind me made me spin around. A figure stood in the doorway, but this one was different. He had a tired yet alert expression, holding a baseball bat. We locked eyes, and before either of us could speak, a crash from the hallway interrupted. Another person, or infected individual, had stumbled in. The newcomer lunged at the man with the bat. He swung, connecting with a dull impact. The intruder sprawled onto the floor, still trying to reach us. It showed no reaction to pain. Without hesitation, I helped slam the door shut, but the damage made it impossible to latch. The intruder kept pushing, growling at the gap. The man jammed a chair under the handle, then gestured for me to follow him deeper into the apartment. We dashed to a bedroom, barricading ourselves behind a heavy dresser. Only then did he allow himself to speak. He asked if I knew what was going on. I told him about what I'd seen and the partial broadcasts mentioning an infection. He said the building had been like this for hours. People turning on each other, some fleeing, others acting like mindless creatures. A shortwave radio in the corner crackled, picking up bits of distress calls. Over the static, we heard fragments of instructions to find designated safe zones. The battery was almost dead, so the messages cut in and out. As we attempted to plan, the noise outside the door grew. More of those individuals had apparently found the broken entrance. Moaning, banging, the scraping of hands on wood. The man checked the window. A rusted fire escape led down to an alley below, but a handful of staggering figures were already wandering there. Neither the hallway nor the alley seemed safe. Time felt like it was running out. I glanced at the shortwave radio, catching a brief phrase. All citizens, city centre, possibly secure. The transmission faded to static. City centre was miles away, but it might be the only place with any coordinated relief. The man with the bat nodded in grim agreement. We had two choices: stay and be cornered, or make a break for it. We stacked furniture to block the bedroom door, a heavy dresser, a nightstand, even a broken lamp. It wouldn't hold indefinitely, but it gave us a chance to leave through the window without immediate pursuit. Together we climbed onto the fire escape. The metal stairs creaked dangerously, alerting everything nearby of our presence. Below, the shuffling crowd stirred. We couldn't see exactly how many were in the alley, but the moaning rose in intensity. With a shared glance, we began descending as quietly as possible. On the second landing, a hand reached out from beneath the grated platform, grabbing the man's ankle. He stomped down, freeing himself from the grip of yet another infected individual who had somehow climbed onto the fire escape. Panic drove me forward, and I lowered myself to the next level, only to find more reaching hands. They were relentless, uncoordinated, but numerous. We scrambled back up, returning to the window we'd just left, but the pounding on the barricaded door inside the bedroom sounded even louder now. Trapped on the narrow platform, we looked for another route. A neighboring window led to a different apartment, but it was barred. We kicked at it in desperation. The bars refused to give. The moans below intensified, and we spotted multiple figures gathering at the base of the fire escape. Some started climbing. The man with the bat nodded to me, then pointed to the rooftop ladder. It was retracted, but we might reach it if we pulled ourselves up on the railing. Clinging to the shaky metal, we boosted each other until he could grab the bottom rung. With a grunt of exertion, he pulled it down. I climbed first, struggling not to lose my grip. My arms burned, but adrenaline kept me moving. He followed right behind me, and we hauled ourselves onto the roof just as several infected individuals started clawing at the lower rungs. The roof offered a brief moment of security, an open expanse with a low ledge, but the view of the city was anything but reassuring. Fires blazed in pockets around downtown. Streets were blocked by abandoned vehicles, some smashed or overturned. Distant wailing sirens echoed, occasionally drowned out by explosions. Helicopters circled areas where plumes of smoke rose high into the cloudy sky. I couldn't piece together how the authorities might handle this. It felt like the entire world had fallen apart overnight. We crawled behind a large air conditioning unit, unsure of our next step. The man introduced himself as Kevin, a resident who had been holed up since the crisis began. He mentioned that the outbreak started small, reports of violent incidents, and quickly spread. People turned uncontrollable, the city fell into panic, and now it was everywhere. We shared a silent agreement that staying put was a death sentence. We needed to keep moving, possibly reach city center or any rumored safe zone. We searched for a way down from the roof without landing in another alley full of infected. The building next door was close enough to jump across, so we balanced along the ledge and leapt onto the adjacent rooftop. Kevin nearly slipped, but I caught his arm. The effort took the last of my strength, leaving me lightheaded. Yet we pressed on. Each building felt like an island in a sea of chaos. Below, the infected roamed, eyes unfocused yet always reacting to noise and motion. On the third rooftop, we found a service ladder leading to a maintenance room. The door was ajar. We ventured inside, flashlight in hand. The cramped space contained pipes, circuit breakers, and a caged light flickering overhead. It led to a stairwell that descended into darkness. Kevin tried a switch on the wall, but only a faint glow appeared. The entire building must have been on emergency power. Still, we had to chance it. Huddling close together, we descended the steps, hearing the hum of the building's mechanical systems. After a few flights, faint sounds of movement reached our ears. Shuffling feet, soft moans. We paused at each landing, listening, unsure of how many might be lurking in the corridors. The tension continued to rise. A single misstep could reveal our presence and draw a horde our way. Eventually, we reached what seemed to be a basement or sublevel. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with storage rooms. Water dripped from exposed pipes, creating puddles on the floor. The smell of dampness mingled with something musty. Kevin aimed the flashlight around, and that's when we spotted a sign indicating an underground parking garage. If we could find a vehicle with keys inside, maybe we'd have a chance to get out of this part of town. Just then, the flashlight beam caught a figure stumbling around the corner. We froze. Its face was partially obscured by long, stringy hair. Torn clothing suggested it had been through a lot. It let out a low rasp, turning toward us. Any hope it might be a frightened survivor vanished when it lurched forward with outstretched arms. Kevin stepped in front of me, bat raised. I held the broomstick, feeling ridiculous but determined. The figure charged faster than expected. Kevin swung, knocking it back, but it recovered almost instantly. I jabbed with the broomstick, trying to keep it at bay. Our adversary continued to groan, swiping at us. We managed to shove it into a nearby storeroom and slammed the door shut. There was no lock, so we pushed a heavy shelf in front. Thumps erupted from inside as it continued to struggle. Kevin and I exchanged a quick look, deciding it was time to leave. We pressed on until the corridor opened into a large subterranean lot. The overhead lights flickered, revealing rows of vehicles. Some had broken windows or popped hoods. A few still seemed intact. The echo of dripping water and the hum of the ventilation system made it impossible to tell if we were alone. Careful to stay low, we moved between cars, checking if any had keys or showed signs of life. Towards the far end, near the exit ramp, we spotted a small SUV with its driver's door open. Approaching slowly, we realized the windshield was cracked, and the interior light was on. A faint beep indicated the keys were indeed in the ignition. We peered inside. The seats were stained with something dark, but there was no sign of the driver. Nervous about the possibility of someone infected lurking nearby, we quickly checked the back seat, empty aside from scattered trash. Kevin hopped in the driver's seat, turning the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, echoing through the garage. Immediately, moans and shuffling noises intensified in the dark corners. Figures emerged, drawn by the noise of the engine. Some came from the ramp leading outside, others from behind pillars. The sight made my stomach tighten. Kevin slammed the door shut. I raced around to the passenger side, nearly slipping on an oil slick, and jumped in. We navigated the SUV through the garage, bumping into abandoned cars. Dozens of infected forms converged behind us, some slapping at the windows, leaving smears behind. Kevin floored it toward the exit ramp, swerving around more staggering silhouettes. The ramp itself was partially blocked by a delivery truck, but we managed to squeeze past with a loud screech of metal on metal. Emerging onto the street felt like bursting through a prison gate. Outside, the chaos continued. People ran in every direction, some chased by infected. Storefronts were smashed. Alarms blared incessantly. Kevin gunned the accelerator, weaving around debris and abandoned vehicles. My eyes darted to the sidewalk, where a family huddled behind a fence. They beckoned for help, but we had no room in the SUV, and the road behind us was clogged with infected. Guilt flashed through me, but we couldn't stop. All the while I remembered the emergency broadcast. All citizens, city center, possibly secure. That had to be our destination. I turned on the radio, cycling through static until we heard bits of an emergency channel, talking about quarantine zones and last known safe spots. Nothing concrete. We took a turn onto a major avenue, where military jeeps were stationed up ahead. A blockade of sandbags and barbed wire spanned the intersection. We slowed, honking gently, hoping it was a rescue point. Soldiers with tense faces motioned for us to stop. But as soon as they saw the state of our SUV, cracked windows, dark stains, they raised their weapons. One shouted an order we couldn't fully hear. Kevin tried to explain that we weren't infected, but we didn't even know if they could understand us over the engines and distant screams. Then, in a panic, an infected crowd swarmed the blockade from a side street. Gunfire erupted, confusion everywhere. Amid the chaos, the soldiers signaled us to reverse or get out of the line of fire. Another wave of infected poured out of nearby alleys, driving the soldiers' attention away from us. Kevin gritted his teeth and hit the gas, swerving onto a side road to avoid the crossfire. We nearly collided with an overturned bus, skidding to a halt. Our path to the city center was blocked, at least from this route. We scrambled to find another street, turning down narrower roads. The entire city felt like a maze of destruction. Every attempt to move forward was complicated by piles of debris, collisions, or swarms of infected. Sirens blared overhead. Distant helicopters cut across the sky, shining spotlights onto crumbling rooftops. The sense of an unstoppable calamity weighed heavily on us. Finally, the SUV's engine began to cough. Fuel gauge dipped precariously low, and a high-pitched whine suggested the vehicle was on its last legs. We pulled into a small parking lot beside a boarded-up grocery store. Another group of infected wandered near the entrance, so we kept our distance. The SUV sputtered and died. That was it. No more driving. Kevin and I exchanged an exasperated look, then grabbed what little supplies we had. We hurried behind the store, finding a service door partially ajar. The smell of rotted produce hit us. Inside, the place was dark, the aisles ransacked. Some flickering emergency lights revealed empty shelves. We saw no immediate signs of infected, but the entire store felt haunted by what must have been a frantic evacuation. Cartons strewn across the floor, broken glass, overturned freezers. Every step echoed. We decided to look for water or canned food, anything to keep us going until we found a better haven. While searching, we heard a loud metallic clang toward the front entrance. Ducking behind an aisle, we peeked through a gap. Several infected forced their way inside, drawn perhaps by our rummaging or simply by the slightest sound. There were too many to fight, even if we had better weapons. We retreated deeper into the store, pushing through double doors that led to a storage area. A flash of movement made us freeze. Another survivor, an older man, crouched beside a tall shelf. He signaled for us to be quiet. He whispered that we could get onto the store's roof through a nearby service ladder. Gathering what little energy remained, we followed him. The infected from the front had started to spread out among the aisles, their groans echoing off the walls. We slipped into the back corridor, found the ladder, and climbed up one at a time. The older man came last, pulling the ladder up, just as dark shapes converged beneath it. Reaching the rooftop, we collapsed behind a row of vents, panting from the ordeal. The older man said he'd been hiding in the store since morning, that the city had become overrun in a matter of hours. No official rescue had arrived. The only messages he'd heard were pre-recorded government alerts urging people to find safe zones or remain indoors. Every glimpse of the streets below confirmed how difficult that was. In the distance, a series of explosions lit the skyline. Plumes of smoke rose and it seemed unstoppable. My mind replayed the critical piece of the emergency broadcast. Safe zones, city center, possibly. That possibly carried all the uncertainty in the world. Yet it also gave us a reason to keep going. This felt like just the start of a nightmare that might last far longer than anyone expected. We had to hold on to any shred of hope, even if it meant risking every step. But first, we needed a plan. Resting for more than a moment wasn't an option. The older man suggested we move along the rooftops until we found a building with a functioning radio or a vantage point to see if the highways were completely blocked. Kevin checked the shortwave radio, tapping it in frustration, but only static answered. We climbed to the highest point of the grocery store roof, scanning for a path. The older man pointed to a neighboring building with a wide facade. If we could bridge the gap somehow, maybe a plank or ladder from the store's maintenance area, we might cross onto that building's fire escape. We got to work, rummaging through rooftop debris, searching for anything sturdy enough to serve as a bridge. A sudden gust of wind carried the distant cries of more survivors, or perhaps more infected. It was too hard to tell. The older man and Kevin struggled to maneuver a large wooden panel to the edge of the rooftop. I helped steady it, hoping it wouldn't snap under our weight. The building next door was only a few feet away, so with some effort, we laid the panel across. It sagged precariously in the middle. Kevin volunteered to test it first. He shuffled across, arms out, the wooden board creaking. The older man and I watched anxiously. Kevin reached the other side and waved for us to follow. One by one we made it, each movement feeling like it could be the last. Below, infected milled around aimlessly, oblivious to our crossing above their heads. This new building appeared abandoned. A doorway on the roof led into a dark stairwell. The older man tried the handle, locked. Then I remembered the ring of keys from the bar. With shaky hands, I tested them, and miraculously, one key fit, turning with a click. We slipped inside, once again stepping into a dim corridor that smelled of dust and neglect. Our flashlights illuminated scuffed walls and chipped paint. We descended carefully, hearing faint noises from within. On the 4th floor, we spotted an open apartment door. The unit beyond was silent, but the front windows faced the city. We entered, scanning each room. It seemed empty of occupants. The living room window offered a broad view of downtown. Flames reflected on the glass, and swirling smoke obscured large sections of the skyline. The muffled roar of distant conflict served as a grim reminder that we were far from safe. On a small table in the corner sat a television. Kevin tried to switch it on. Static filled the screen until the emergency broadcast logo flashed. Then, in a shaky feed, a news anchor delivered a final looping message. An unidentified infection has spread nationwide. All citizens are instructed to seek official safe zones. Military units have attempted to establish checkpoints, but communication is sporadic. If you can hear this message, stay alert. Remain in secure locations. Help one another if possible. The anchor's eyes held a haunted look, repeating the instructions in an endless loop. The screen glitched, and the broadcast cut to a blank emergency alert screen. The older man exhaled, uncertain. Kevin turned to me, an unspoken question in his gaze. Do we attempt the journey to these rumored safe zones, or do we hole up again, hoping for rescue? Hiding felt like slow defeat. Moving on felt like a gamble. Either way, the city was in ruins, and we didn't know how far the infection had spread. Before we could discuss next steps, the emergency alert changed. A scrolling caption read, "Evacuation routes compromised. If you can reach designated shelters, do so. Exercise extreme caution." Then the screen flickered out entirely, leaving us staring at our own reflections in the black screen. We had come full circle, from a dark stockroom in a bar to this battered apartment. Everything pointed to a single terrible truth. The world as we knew it was under siege, and there might not be a return to normal. I remembered how I'd ended up in that bar, the heartbreak of losing my job, the shame of turning to the bottle. Now I was out here, forced to survive in a reality that seemed more like a nightmare than anything else. I couldn't tell if the city had fallen, or if there was still hope somewhere beyond its borders. A faint glow from the hallway drew our attention. The older man went to investigate, returning a moment later with an ashen face. Several infected had entered the building, creeping floor by floor. Their low moans echoed through the corridor. Our respite was already over. We prepared to move again, hearts pounding. No, we couldn't even focus on that. The pounding fear was replaced by raw determination. There was no safe place anymore, just the temporary illusion of one. Our only real chance was to keep going, keep searching for any stronghold of survivors. Gathering what few supplies we had, we returned to the stairwell. Every step outside felt like a confrontation waiting to happen. Through the windows, the flicker of fires illuminated the night sky. A breeze carried smoke and dust through the shattered glass. Staring down the battered flight of stairs, I forced myself to remember that broadcast one last time. The world is under siege. Citizens, find safe zones, if any remain. With that, we left the apartment and descended into the uncertain darkness, poised for whatever came next. That's all for now. But don't mistake the end of the story for the end of the nightmare. If you're still listening, like, comment and subscribe. Keep the signal alive. And remember, in a world like this, the real horror begins when the voices go silent.